Hello, everybody. This is Mike Nelson of the Mike Nelson Show. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure to subscribe right now. Today, I got a pretty cool guest. I got Carl Canedy of the Rods. How you doing today, Carl?
Hey Mike, how are you?
Doing pretty good. So let's get into your career. When did your whole musical journey kind of kick off for you?
I was 4.5 and I wanted to play drums, and didn't happen because, single mother and no money. But by the time I got 13, I had this music store owner come to where my mother worked and got her to sign an installment contract for $65 a month. And I got this set of Japanese drums, and they were crap, but it was enough to play. They were two tom-toms, a bass drum, a snare drum, hi-hat, and two cymbals was enough to keep me going. And so I practiced every day like crazy. And after 6 months, I was in a band, and that was it. Like, and those guys in that band, I can't remember who they were. I want to thank them. Next time I go to church, I'll light a candle for them because must have sucked so badly, right? Only playing 6 months, didn't have a lesson. I was just a fanatic about drums. And I'd been tapping on my drum pad prior to getting a drum set. But bottom line was, how bad must I have been? And then I recently thought about it, and I thought, but wait, as bad as I was, how bad must they have been to have me as their drummer, right? So maybe it was a good fit. But it was, 6 months after I got my drums, I was in a band and never looked back.
Now, so drums was your first instrument. Then you never played anything else. Then at the beginning, there you were always kind of into the drums.
Once at I have 5 guitars over here in the corner. I have another five wandering around the house. Um, within right after I got it, within a month or something of playing drums, getting my drums, I was playing guitar. So I kind of learned simultaneously. So that's how people always wonder, like, "Oh, it says you wrote that song." I'm like, they think I must have whistled it or something, but I actually write the parts on guitar and then I put them all down on tape. I call them my 30-minute demos. I put bass parts down, drum parts down, the guitar parts, the guitar solos. I'll sing the song. I'll give them to the guys. Like, here's a song. If you want to do it, let's work on it. So
I don't know if you've seen recently Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters. He talked about how playing guitar is very similar to playing the drums, and it kind of has a set similar style while learning. What do you think about that? Is that kind of how it was for you too? Learning the guitar and drums, was it kind of similar in both senses?
well, I think it's rhythm, isn't it? And so it's just like a bass player is very rhythmic. And as well as melodic. And with the guitar, like Dave Grohl, you can see he plays a lot of downstrokes and very rhythmic, very percussive approach to the guitar. He's not pulling out little single notes all the time. He's hitting those chords. So yeah, I see it. I mean, I play that way sometimes myself. I try to write things that are more percussive and more rhythmic.
So, how did your involvement with the Rods begin? How did you get into the band? How did
Well,
it all start out?
David and I had been we had done David and Joey DeMaio had played together in a band called Thunder. And I went to see them in a theater in Auburn, New York. And I remember saying to the bass player in my band, Colossus, which has a new album out now. Let me plug that. Um, which is a really great. We haven't had one since 1978. This is the first all new material on Deco Records. But Link and I were sitting there, and I always wore earplugs. All these years, I've had earplugs, and I I have my earplugs in, but I pulled them out and I went, the hum. They had so many amplifiers. It was so the hum. I said to Link, the hum is louder than we play as a band. It's the loudest. The hum alone was louder than I could imagine of any band playing. And that was before they started. And then when they started playing, I could see my buddy Dave Galoots playing drums, and I just saw his arms waving and the cymbals moving, and I heard nothing else. It was just bass and guitar. They were so loud. But so I knew Joey and I knew David from that was we had done some gigs, some different shows, outdoor festivals with them. And one day they came to me and asked if I'd like to play. And so I said, of course. So I wasn't doing anything at that time. And so we started working on some material. It didn't really go anywhere, but then Joey started Manowar, which, he asked me to join, and which I did for a period of time. And then David and I started the Rod. So it was that period of time. That's how we kind of met, and everything kind of morphed into the Rods.
Now, what kind of scene were the Rods kind of getting into when they first started? In that time period, what was it like in New York starting a band then?
When we first started playing, it was the end of disco. And I remember playing a club called Night Court, I think it was called. And when we first started, we were playing we were playing covers, but we were playing heavy music and we were playing originals. And we cleared that within 20 minutes. That club was emptied out, and the only people left were girlfriends and road crew. And we did that a lot of places for a while. And then eventually we started building a following. But initially it was scary.
So, your of course your guitarist David Feinstein, he played with Elf, of course. They featured the legendary Dio. How was it like? Of course he had a lot of more experience, I guess, than the rest of the other guys in the band. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, on a concert level, he absolutely did. But of course, the band I was in that just released Colossus, this album, we were playing 6 nights a week. So we had been together for a number of years. We played all over, and so we were experienced. I was experienced. I've been playing all over, a multi-state area for at least 15 years. So yeah, but David had done touring with Deep Purple and played with open for a lot of bands. So he had more experience in one sense, but we meshed pretty well. And of course, our bass player
Now,
Steve
did
Starmer, our first bass player, he was had played in a lot of clubs, so Steve was pretty savvy with performance as well.
did you guys stay in contact with Dio during the years in the 80s?
I think I only had contact with Ronnie through David. So Ronnie came and sang two songs. The last, really, supposedly the last two songs he ever sang, "Metal Will Never Die" and "The Code," which of course was a song that I wrote, and David was gracious enough. Ronnie was going to sing two songs, and David suggested he sing "The Code." He thought it was a good fit for Ronnie, and that was like a big highlight of my career. So, so I would see Ronnie, and when in the early days with a band prior to Colossus, it was called Raw Meat. Elf rehearsed in the house. We rehearsed in this finished garage. So I would see the guys at rehearsal all the time, pass, "Hey, what's up? What's going on?" So, but it never really, got close to him. A couple of the guys in Elf I was close to, Gary Driscoll, the drummer, and so on. But anyway, so no, I wasn't. But when Ronnie, once toward the end, when Ronnie came in, then we got to know Ronnie, and he was everything David said he was. But David and Ronnie were very close the last 10 or 15 years of his life. Ronnie would come in, David would fly out to LA. So they were close. And there was talk of doing another Elf album. So it's a shame that Ronnie's untimely passing, because he had a lot of music left to give.
So you're saying there was some ideas then to make another Elf album, in the later years for Ronnie.
Absolutely. Toward the end, that was something that was on his list to do. Now, whether or not it would have come to fruition, but he and David were talking about it and were maybe working toward it. I know they were working on some material.
Now let's go back to the beginning of the Rods. For you, you're a singing drummer, which is not very, of course, common in heavy metal. Talk to me about how that started. When you started singing, and how that was singing and playing.
It's always been easy for me to sing and play. It didn't affect my tempo, but I don't have the greatest voice. But I write a lot of songs, and especially back then, I wrote a lot of material. And so sometimes I would sing them. But I started with Colossus. We were a cover band. We were playing 6 nights a week, as I said. So we all needed to carry the load vocally. It's a lot of vocals, a lot of 6 nights a week is a tough grind. So, and then with the Rods, there were only three of us. So I was singing backup, and then I would sing lead on a few songs, but not very much. And then when we reunited, which somebody just showed me a thing of 2005. So can't believe we've been back together actively for that long. But anyway, we decided that there's so much bleed through from the mic, and it just wasn't needed. So, I don't even sing harmony anymore
Now with the
live.
Colossus, yeah, with the Colossus project, of course, that you finally released that music recently. Talk to me about the story behind that.
Well, we've been working on that for a couple of years. That's all new music and all done remotely, of course, but all original members. And our bass player Lincoln, he was, he produced the album and he wrote several of the songs on the album and arranged everything. So he did a great job. And it was fun because we played so many days together. It was very natural to fall into working on that kind of material. But I was basically given tracks and able to just knock out the drum tracks. Very simple and fun for me.
Now, let's go back to the Rods days. What was probably like the biggest show the band did, back in the '80s when you guys were recording and playing, on a consistent basis? What was probably the biggest show you guys did?
Hmm. Well, I think the first big show we ever did was at Broome County Arena, which I think is 7 or 8,000 sold out. Opening for Blue Oyster Cult. We were a last minute replacement, and that was incredible. First show, in an arena. So that was really memorable. Of course, we did quite a few arenas throughout the West, especially Texas area, and so we did that with Judas Priest, with Foghat, like Crocus, whatever. So we did some really big shows.
Now let's talk to me about the Wild Dogs album. It has a lot of great riffs. I've always kind of liked the sound and the production on that record. Talk to me about making that album and how much involvement you had, in writing those songs.
I wrote quite a few of those songs, including Wild Dogs. But David has some killer songs on that. Violation, one of my favorites to play still. Too Hot to Stop, I love playing that. Some really good songs. But my songs were like Burned by Love, Waiting for Tomorrow, Wild Dogs. I think we had some good songs written for that album. And we flew to England and we recorded at Parkgate Studios, which is where uh, Def Leppard came in literally like the day after we left and stayed there for months recording Pyromania, I believe it was. So it was fun to do. On one hand, it was cold, it was England, it was damp. So on the other hand, it was not that much fun. But we were really excited to record that second album.
Now, were you already starting to produce music back in those days? Were you? Because I know later on you produced music. Were you already learning how to do that back then?
I had basically been producing some demos. With Colakis, our first album, we each produced our own songs. So I produced the songs I wrote. And we all contributed. I've always had a knack for arranging, been comfortable with that. And so, I've been involved in that. And then when we did the first album, a lot of times it would be just David and me. So we kind of produced the album ourselves and we've kind of carried on with that. So that's really how we got in. We didn't have the money to hire a producer. In fact, we didn't, honestly, at the time, we didn't even know what a producer did. We, we had no clue. Like we just knew, like, okay, maybe we can do that one better. Okay, great, let's do it.
Now, during this time, you played with Manuwar. How was that?
Being at the genesis of Manowar, that was incredible. Ross, uh, Eric, Joey, it was powerful. The songs were phenomenal. I knew they were going to be absolutely huge. And it's a great memory for me, being with them when they got signed to EMI and doing the demo for the band. It was a great time, great memories. And
What's exactly
Ross
the
is
story
still.
behind you being involved with that group, though? What's the story behind that? Did they ask you to kind of just do the demo, or what was the story behind that?
No, they had asked me to be part of the band, and I was a member of the band. But for me, it came down to the Rods got a record deal at the same time, and I liked writing songs, and I knew there would be no room for me as a songwriter in Manowar, and so that was really it. I mean, it was an easy decision for me, even though I knew they were going to be huge, and I
Did you ever play
loved
any
that.
live shows with them?
No, no.
Now, with the Rods playing in the '80s, you guys recorded an album basically every year from '80 to '84. Did that kind of take a lot out of the band? How was it, recording and playing basically on a constant basis during those years?
when you're doing it full time, it's not a drain at all. You want to do that, and that's what we love doing that. So it was not a problem. I think later, as things got so we no longer had management, we weren't getting a lot of gigs. There was no internet. So until the internet, the advent of the internet and people emailing, we really didn't know that we had fans around the world. My friend Hans Daka from Norway, he contacted me and we had been, pen pals. And then one day he goes, "Hey, would you guys want to come to Norway?" And that's what started us traveling to Europe every year, um, thanks to Hans Daka. So, and hail to the DNC, the drunken Norwegian crew.
Now, what do you think prevented the Rods from getting an American radio hit? Of course, back in those days, we know bands really needed to get that, that hit on the radio. What prevented the band from getting that airplay? Because there was, of course, some heavy music that was getting played on commercial radio, back in the '80s, much more than today. But what do you think prevented the Rods from getting that hit?
I think we had some songs that had some radio potential, but I also think that we both realized, David and I, that we didn't have the producer that was going to make it a commercial sounding record. And so that was really the big ingredient that was missing. And so I think now with the new album, Rattle the Cage, we found Chris Collier. When we were doing Brotherhood, I wanted to have somebody mix the album who was fantastic. And I started looking around and I checked out tons of bands, tons of mixes, asked my friends. And I heard Last in Line and I was like, that blows me away, that mix. So then I checked around and eventually Jeff Pilson said, yeah, that's Chris Collier. And he gave me his number. So Chris has done the 450s album, the Canedy Warrior album, and Brotherhood of Metal for me. And and then this album. And because we've worked with Chris, it's a no-brainer. He definitely knows how the band sounds. And so now we have an album where the songs are really well written and it presents the songs the way we want them. And his mix brings it to light. And it's, really was a great synergistic uh, situation with Chris being involved with the whole mixing process.
Now with the Rods, you guys always did what you guys wanted, right? You guys were never really pressured to move in any direction. You guys, during the '80s, were you guys playing exactly like how you wanted to sound?
That's exactly right. We were a big FU. In fact, I laugh about it now because Mike Bone, who was our A&R guy, when we first signed to Arista, he suggested two songs for that album, which essentially was Rock Hard, the album we had done independently and pressed 1,000 copies, financed and the whole 9 yards. But then when Arista picked us up, they took all of that and then we added two songs. So we went in to record. In fact, we recorded those two songs, and then the next day, at the same studio with my drums still set up, I did the Man of War demo. But the Mike Bone suggested two songs, and he suggested for the first album, Ace in the Hole and Nothing Going On in the City. Brilliant suggestions, and we did them, and they fan favorites. However, when we got to England, I don't know, because we were young, we were cocky, we didn't like the material. He suggested two songs. I don't even remember what they were. Like I couldn't tell you, like they were great songs, Like I don't know if they were crap or if they were great songs. I don't even remember. All I know is we were like, dude, we're not going to do somebody else's material, man. Like we'll write our own two songs. So that's what we did. We wrote two songs on the fly. I don't remember what they were. I need to ask Mike, but we laugh about that because that basically, that was a big slap in the face to him, and he didn't deserve that. And of course, we probably lost a little bit of support at the label because of it. So young and stupid and cocky, but we always did what we wanted. And that was the whole thing. We played loud and we played obnoxiously, and we were proud.
Now, back in those days, it seems like a lot of bands in your genre were more successful in Europe. Is that kind of true? You guys were always going to Europe, recording albums in Europe. It seems like the
Yeah.
audiences over there appreciated metal more, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in Europe, like now it's not, now I see American fans are more savvy and more definitely discerning. But back then it was governed by radio here. And so if you were told this was the hip thing, then you were like, oh, that's the hip thing. I've got to get that. And, when you were told it wasn't cool, then it wasn't cool for you anymore. And in America, the country fans were the hardcore fans. If they liked an artist, they stayed with that artist as long as the artist didn't, you know, change drastically. But in Europe, the fans were like the country fans here in the US. If they liked a band, as long as the band was still cranking out great music, they didn't look for trends. They just liked that band and they stayed with that band and they would support them. They would buy their product. So it was easier to have some success and sustainability in Europe because of the fans. And people always go, they're the best fans in the world, but they are like they're great fans around the world. Japanese fan support, European fan support. We're talking about going to Australia. I know they support. So, but Europe was a lot easier. American fans support, but America is so big, it's hard to. You have to hit pockets in America, and if you look at America and you put Europe in America, it's you have a lot of countries, whereas in America it's wide open and you've got big drive times and probably not going to find a heavy metal base in North Dakota, every little town. So
Now, what eventually broke the band up there in the 80s?
nothing broke the band up. We never had words. We never had bad feelings. What happened was, like I said,
I mean, in
we had
terms of like start releasing music.
well, what happened was David was David bought a restaurant. Gary was on tour with Kim Simmons, who had been living with me, and he was on tour with Kim.
So let's go back to that question where I asked about the rods. Kind of, you guys of course stopped releasing music there for a while. What kind of happened there?
Well, we had a series of events. One is we parted ways with our manager. We weren't really happy with a couple of things, and we didn't get picked up by Arista after the second album. And we did a demo, which then turned into Shrapnel, and then they released it. But we didn't really have a label deal. And then I started getting deals for us. So we had a couple deals with Passport, and we had Combat. So with Passport, we actually, for the Heavier Than Now album, we were actually on the song Crossfire. We were getting great airplay around the country. The song was starting to catch fire. But Passport had gotten in bed with Sony, and the deal went south, and it left Passport bankrupt. So that plug got pulled. And at that point, we really had nothing. I was producing. David had the restaurant. Gary was on the road. And it just kind of grinded to a halt. I mean, we didn't really, there was no acrimony, but just nothing to do. Like until we played the odd gig here and there, but it's just as difficult to gear up for one gig as it is to gear up for a whole tour. So after a while, I was like, it's a lot of effort to go play one gig. You got to rehearse a lot. So that was kind of how we went. And then we just 1 year turned into two and so on. And we wound up raising our families.
Now let's fast forward to today with the new Rods album. Talk to me about recording that and how you're feeling about this new album.
Well, we're all really proud of it. Our new bass player, Freddie Villano from Quiet Riot and Dee Snider's Widowmaker. Freddie brings a whole new element to the band. I call us the Thunder Twins. He and I work so well together, and I think that's created a whole rhythm section, a whole different foundation than we've ever had in the Rods. And Freddie brings that Geezer Butler, Bob Daisley, super low end and bright top, which rounds out the band sound perfectly. So, and Freddie sequenced the album. David and I we had a couple songs, like each of us had one song different. And we're like, I think it should go here. Yeah, but I think it should go here. And David said, you know what, let's let the new guy. And so Freddie sequenced the album very differently than David and I were doing. And it's perfect. Did a great job. So I think we're really happy with the songwriting. We're happy with the production. And, the addition of Freddie makes the sound really where we've always wanted to be. And it's more of what the live sound is. Because with Gary, our previous bass player, Gary had, live, he was a phenomenal bass player. In the studio, he was a minimalist, and his bass sound was very mid-rangey. So it's a different day now for us, and we're excited about it. And I think we turned the corner on a couple of things. One is that David really cranked out some great songs for this. And normally I would be, working with my guitar and contributing, but I contributed. I had this idea for Rattle the Cage and the lyrics. Sometimes you just have to rattle the cage, and sent him those, and he cranked it out with a great song. And same with Shockwave. Even fewer lyrics I sent him for Shockwave, and he came back with a killer tune. But and Freddie contributed Hell or High Water, and he brought in a riff when we were all jamming on it. So it's definitely a collaboration. But David wrote almost all the music and the lyrics, almost everything except for our contributions, which were significant. But in the big picture, David wrote the majority of this, and it's a new day. His lyrics, his focus, his voice, it's all just definitely Rod's 2.0.
Now with this new album, how did you guys record this? Did you guys record this remotely, or was it done in a studio?
David records with Lonnie Park at Barncastle Studios, and so he records there. Freddie records in his home studio, and I record right here, right there where you can see my drums.
Okay.
I record right here.
What's the band's 2024 plans? I know you guys got some in Australia later this year, but what else outside of that? What else is the band kind of prepping for the fans out there?
We're doing a show with Jim Florentine on April 20th in Ithaca at, I think it's Lakeview Inn. And we have Time to Rock in Sweden, July 6th. And then we're looking at something in October for Australia, 3 dates. And then in the meantime, we're looking at other dates that we've just not finalized, so I can't announce anything. And we also are, I would say, about 7 songs in on a new album.
Wow.
So, yeah, so
the new album,
really,
what you think? The new album
pardon?
you think would be coming out maybe next year then?
My hope is that we will release it in January next year again.
All right, sounds good. Now for those last question here, for those singing drummers out there isn't that many of them. What would be your advice to them on how to keep rhythm and how to do it for so long, like you've done it for so many years, Carl?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And I noticed some of the drummers who play and sing, tempo goes up and down, up and down. And you basically have to kind of split your brain between what you're focusing on singing wise, your pitch, your intonation, phrasing, along with what you're playing. And ideally you need to work out your parts rather than, if you're going to try to improvise while you're singing, it's going to be a train wreck and your tempo is going to fluctuate. So you really need to know, what are you playing on the drums? And then how are you going to breathe? How are you going to phrase your song so that you can do both at the same time and not let one step on the other? But Dan Beeler, my buddy Dan Beeler, he's the man we should all be asking. How do you play and sing like that? Holy shit. He's unbelievable.
Oh, I want to thank you, Carl. I really appreciate your time. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much for the support, Mike. Really, really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Remember, stay heavy.